Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Charlie Curson to the show. Charlie is a strategic advisor, investor, accredited leadership coach, and the founder of his coaching company called Mandarin. With 25 plus years of experience on helping 250 plus organizations, from global giants like Visa, McDonald's, L'Oreal, and Unilever to ambitious startups. Charlie helps leaders think bigger, plan smarter, and act more strategically. Today, we'll be deep diving into his new book called Be More Strategic: 12 Essential Practices to Build the Life and Career You Want. This book is packed with practical insights to help you sharpen your strategic thinking and make better decisions at work and in your day to day life. So, Charlie, welcome to the show. And I'm really honored to have you on the show as well.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Incredibly generous introduction as well. You set the bar high.
Of course, that's what we do. Thank you. So let's jump in. So I would love to know a bit about yourself and what really inspired you to write a book on strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said this in the kind introduction. So I've had 25 years of working in the strategy space. I was a consultant for many years. I was, for those old enough, I was Big Five, what was then become Big Four. So that kind of world of strategy co-creation, developing strategy with people. So I guess I went from the more classic consulting background into a world of more developing strategy with clients rather than it taking months and months and maybe way too many PowerPoint slides. It went a lot more down to facilitation and short 6-12 week processes involving far more people than just a leadership team. It became a lot more about the psychology and the facilitation of it, the human side of it. I'm a real believer that strategy is all about humans, right, and people. And I guess the more I did that, and I was doing, working with multiple clients, multiple sectors, all in, each and every week, which was in itself fascinating. As you mentioned this just a moment ago, working with, say, someone like a Visa for many years as a client, but at the same time, I was helping a charity and I was doing pro bono work, but the disciplines were the same. I was introduced as a coach all the time. I was always being introduced to people as a coach. And I was always a little bit hesitant because coaching, in its own right is a discipline. Coaching is different to mentoring. And so I decided to qualify as a coach. So I qualified originally as a performance coach. And I guess if you wind forward another 10 odd years, I guess you mentioned investing, but keeping that to one side, I wear 3 hats. So I still act as an advisor to many companies, large and small. I am a coach, so I coach teams and leaders. And I also do an awful lot of upskilling. So I'm not really a trainer, but upskilling on the subject of strategy and strategic thinking and the name of the book, right? I often have people come to me with that exact question or challenge.
Yeah.
How do I become or be more strategic? And I guess, well, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, exactly. So your title, Be More Strategic, but you're all the time in performance meetings or job descriptions. So what does it really mean to be more strategic?
Well, without going chapter and verse, because of course that's in many ways what the book then becomes about. I guess the point there is, well, linking back to my last answer, often the brief I'm given, I guess, is, can you help us to think more strategically? Which in itself, I don't think is that well understood. In fact, I don't think strategy is that well understood. Again, one of the reasons for writing the book is to try to make it accessible to more people. I think it's still a little bit stuck in the world of academia and business schools or the very top of an organization. I find often get to very senior roles, 25, 30 years into a career, very operational, and suddenly they're in a leadership role where they need to develop a strategy or think strategically, and they struggle, right? Because they don't even really fully understand what it means. Some do, of course. Some are very natural at it. And so the B, I think, is important because I think it is something, having worked with so many people over the years, which is a real privilege, you observe it at close quarters, especially as a coach, and something that people adopt in the way that they in the way they act, right, it does become about habits. It becomes about not just skills, but mindset and behaviors as much as it is about knowledge. So you can go and do, let's say, the modules of an MBA, and you can go and apply those things, but actually they will fall. This is slightly unfair, maybe they sort of fall a little bit on deaf ears if that person isn't open-minded or curious enough or have the creativity in order to be able to actually apply it in practice. So I'm not an academic, I'm not a theorist, albeit I'm a avid reader and learner, but actually it's much more about doing it for real. And I think what you see is people are able to use exactly the same practices as per the subtitle in their lives as they are in their work.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned some of the capabilities of strategy, like curiosity, being creative. So, is there like a strategist that you admire that embodies these capabilities?
Yeah, I'd hesitate to give one person. I say this in the book. In fact, I introduced this character. Billy, which is a kind of notional idea of we've all probably met a Billy, as it were. We've met someone in our careers and our lives who probably epitomizes all these great traits and attributes. Have I come across one person who exhibits them all? Not firsthand, certainly many of them. There are a few characters, I guess, out in the public domain. I've worked with Microsoft. I've not met Satya Nadella, but I admire some of the traits he has, for example. But you also, I think, you see it in politics, in military. I've worked quite a lot in sports, so you see that sort of those traits and characteristics. I think it's more about. I was asked this the other day by someone: do people, in my opinion, walk the talk? And I say, yeah. And you sense it in them. You sense it when I facilitate. I facilitate almost every day. You sense it in the way someone holds themselves, in their self-awareness, in their ability to listen and connect and collaborate and to say no and to be humble enough to change their mind. It tends to be those sort of traits in like a day-to-day moment that you tend to observe those sort of people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And we will be talking about some of the capabilities that you mentioned in the book. And out of for this research for this podcast, I just went online and just typed like what's the most frequently asked questions on strategy. And the most that were confusion about a plan, a strategy, and a goal. So my question to you is what's the difference between a plan and a strategy? And why do organizations so often fall into the trap of planning instead of strategizing? Once and for all, let's just get this sorted.
Yeah, well, if you've been doing your homework, you've probably seen similar answers. I would say, well, I'd answer your second question first in many ways. Why do people do that? I think because it's more comforting, it's more reassuring, it reduces anxiety. But the danger is, of course, it can give people a false sense of certainty. And I think that word certainty versus uncertainty is a good way to see the difference between a plan and a strategy. There is an element of, probably to my earlier answer, not fully understanding what strategy actually really is. People often use this term strategic planning, which you could argue is a little bit of a fudge of just taking planning over a longer time frame. But if planning is a list of actions, yeah, that's much more about giving yourself a sense of certainty. Hey, look, that's why my father was a doctor, right? That's why in medicine or healthcare, one of the first things a medical practitioner might do is, hey, let's make a plan, because in many ways it gives it,
Yeah.
it helps someone to feel a little bit more in control. It removes that. Whereas strategy is about choices. It's about interrelated, interconnected, intentional choices about what you will and won't do, about where you will play, how you will win, where will you place your bets, where will you put your time, your energy, and your resources. And that's why they overlap with leadership. That's why it's difficult to do, right? And that's why it requires a great deal of self-awareness, because it requires bravery, it requires courage, it requires decisiveness in order to be able to do it well and do it properly.
Right. So just so I understand the strategy, what you mean is how do you approach your approach to the particular vision or goal that we have. And then plan is like how you execute it, is like you said, the action steps.
Yeah, exactly. If you just take just planning as just a list of actions,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you actually have any kind of strategy at all. If you go back a few steps, because I think the order in which you do these things is important, You're working with a team. You mentioned like vision. Let's say we're just trying to get from A to B. It might be clear, may not. Okay, some sort of sense of goal, or to your word earlier, or aspiration, or vision, or whatever you want to call it. Have we, or have I, as a team or as an individual, actually spent time considering all of our options, putting all of our choices on the table? It's this word how in many ways, before we've just dived into starting to map out the things we think we should do in the right order because it makes us feel busy and that we're making progress. But of course, and many organizations have done this, that the danger is you end up following rather blindly, often based on history and past successes. And at no point has there been any challenge. Has there been any real critical thought to that? Has there been any creativity in that? I mentioned it earlier, but actually, just quite simply, you go back to a really old-fashioned definition of just strategy is about, it's as much about what you're not doing. I think even that for a lot of people is, how many conversations in businesses up and down the land, around the world, are really about the things we're not going to do. And therefore, it gives us a greater sense of, okay, we are making a choice, right? We are somewhere making a choice about the things we are going to do. And that is where we're going to put our time, our resource, our energy, and then we'll plan accordingly.
Okay, so let's say someone is having a strategic meeting tomorrow, a leader who's listening to this podcast. So, what maybe any practical tips that you can give him that can help them frame the meeting so that they are not wasting time planning but strategizing? Some practical ways that they could do it.
Well, I think it's catching yourself. Yeah, if you hear this and you're thinking, yeah, actually we have a plan, but have we really thought about the strategy? Let's say you're mid-level, right? So it might actually be that you have that thing if you've taken it a little bit from above, as it were. Have you really challenged and understood that? Do you really believe it? Has it been interrogated? Do you understand why it is? Do you understand what the other choices were before this one was taken? Even that, I think, is quite helpful. You'll probably come onto this, but even I think being mindful of the assumptions that are being made, I think even that makes the conversation a little bit more strategic. So to your question about practical advice, being more curious, being a little bit more challenging, asking the questions about what's the opposite of this, maybe, what if we did the very opposite of this? What are we assuming in this? It's that kind of just being a little bit more willing to push and to probe before we simply start to dive into that slightly more reassuring task of agreeing what everyone does and when they do it by.
Right, makes sense. So it's a perfect transition. And you mentioned in the book this circle with four levels, right? And level 2 is cultivate open-mindedness, and you talk about curiosity. And you mentioned in that one of the chapter that you say that great strategists are relentless question askers. So why is curiosity such a powerful strategic tool, according to you?
In short, because it exposes blind spots. Right. So again, in that context of the previous conversation, you are aware of your own limitations. You're aware that you only hold one perspective, and you are interested in hearing others. I think in a sort of, again, a practical sense, you mentioned a sort of strategic meeting, let's say.
Yeah.
You think of a situation where, and obviously this is where psychological safety plays a role, the ability for leaders emerging or existing to really listen to other people's points of view, getting other points of view into the conversation. So let's say you run a department, let's say you've got a departmental meeting tomorrow. How much have you sought, how much time and effort have you put into seeking an alternative perspective on your challenge, let's say, or on your primary issue, or on your goal? Or even within the team, are you really hearing all the voices? Are you really hearing everybody's perspective? As a facilitator, that's one of the most important things I try to do in any team. Hierarchy, let's say, it obviously varies culturally around the world. But are you really being as open-minded as you can? Are you really pushing and probing and lifting up every rock and And then you get into creativity, of course. You get back into, well, actually, have we really teased it around, or are we rather just blindly carrying on? That takes you back to assumptions, actually. I mentioned assumptions a moment ago. So this idea of blind spots, I think, this idea of it's unseen. It could be now, it could be just around the corner. And of course, it might be something that is a potential risk or threat to you or possibly to someone else, but also a potential opportunity, right? Potential opportunities that just get completely missed because we are not being curious and open-minded enough.
Okay, makes sense. And do you advise like leaders before they go into the strategic meeting, should they be in a particular state of mind, which is like they are calm, they're open-minded? Because if they are going after one meeting after another, so how can they be in that state of mind, let's say, so that they can sit back and listen and focus according to
Yeah,
you?
it's a great question. You've read the book, right? So you'll be aware of this quite early on in the book. In fact, my sister, I'm one of 5 children. My older sister said to me the other day that she's been loving reading all the kind of neuroscience and psychology at the beginning of the book. So you're right, yeah. So in short, again, if this is kind of new, this is new to people. Let's just say, let's say at a basic level, we need to be in our upstairs brains. Okay, we need to be in our upstairs brains. This is just basic neuroscience. Let's just keep it in shorthand. And in many, many corporate settings, let's say, because of culture, because of dynamics, because of hierarchy, because of fear of saying no, because we're approaching our performance reviews, we want to look good and we want our bonuses, right? All those reasons mean that we're not as upstairs as we could be. So the amygdala is just getting a little bit twitchy. We're a little bit downstairs. It could also be because we're low on energy. I'm a real believer in energy management and performance. We're bouncing, as you say, from meeting to meeting to meeting. Our brains are full. We're not functioning properly, straight away, right? It kind of, and therefore what might you do? Well, you need to just adjust a bit. It's kind of sounds obvious, but shortening meetings, allowing a little bit of space, a bit of breathing room, ensure you're hydrated, take a moment. If you need to read something, try to read it ahead of time. I mean, it's not hard to do, as it were, but I appreciate it's easy to say, oh, it's all very well, Charlie, but, you know, but I'm old enough and I've been around enough organizations over the years to know that it's a very easy step to take. It's interesting. I'm preparing for something tomorrow. I'm running a big set piece event in London tomorrow. And I had the usual debate then of, we can't really send pre-work, Charlie. Everyone's a little bit too busy, right? And so the negotiation, which I've seen over 1,000 times, is okay. So I accept that everyone's a little bit too busy, but you're also paying a lot of money for 20 plus people to take the day off to be in this room. Is it not worth having them come into the room just a little bit engaged, a little bit warmed up, a little bit curious and ready to share or et cetera, et cetera? I see you nodding. So actually in that situation, it's often a case of, look, we'll respect your time, but actually just come in the right headspace. You've been given something maybe as a provocation, a couple of questions, just to, even if for the people tomorrow, as I said to them, even if you do nothing with it, except sit on the tube on the way in and you're just thinking about it a little bit, but you're thinking about it with intention. You're thinking about it maybe quietly and calmly over a coffee as you come in, but you're just in that kind of headspace where you're allowing maybe more of your full brain, as it like, to actually process this and begin the process of thinking about it rather than, as you suggest, we dive in, we are reactive. There's a powerful idea in leadership about what you call reactive versus creative mindset, or it's called many things in different places. Conscious, unconscious, or conscious leadership, and they reckon actually a lot of the sort of studies done on this suggest, of a poll done I think last year of about 250,000 leaders, 80% of them operate from the majority of their time from a reactive headspace, which is therefore from a place of leaping from decision to decision. You're not fully open-minded. You're not really considering all the options. Your emotions are driving a lot of your decisions. You're not listening properly. You're missing things. You get the idea.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think 2 points jumps from your book. I think one is you mentioned box breathing as well, like breathing in for 4, then and
Yeah.
hold, then breathing out. Maybe before the meeting, hardly takes like 1-2 minutes to do. I think that could help as well. And in terms of preparedness, I think you mentioned the story. You were giving a workshop where then they invited you for dinner. But then the next day you also had to give a meeting to the CEO, presenting him the top key points. And then after the workshop, you did those points, and then you went for dinner as well. So you're prepared, right? Yeah. Any lessons from that story you would like to share?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's two things in there, right? It's sort of, I've also worked quite a lot in really high performing, high functioning environments, corporate startups, but also areas of military and sport and music and even mission starred kitchens. And what do you notice, right? They plan and they prepare. They plan and they prepare. They prepare not just maybe the more obvious things, they prepare their state. They prepare their mind. So it sort of links a bit to that idea. The box breathing, the breathing thing, whatever it happens to be, maybe you've got people listening who are, whether it's martial art backgrounds, or it could be yoga, or it could be whatever it happens to be, it could be meditation, mindfulness. There is a reason why, right? When you work in those high performing environments, a lot of people practice various breathing techniques in order to simply regulate your emotions, right? It's just learning that is how you regulate the emotions. We're talking no more really than 6 to 10 seconds. That's all it really takes. People say we need to be clear headed, but that's really all it is. You know what? Back to your other question about in meetings, if you're a little bit braver, maybe you're in a trusting environment. People are busy. People come in. Maybe we're unable to shrink our diaries, or it's someone else's meeting. Then use the first minute or two simply to ground yourself and check in. Right? And some of the best leaders I know around the world, that's exactly what they do. They will use the first few minutes, check in with people, and there are various techniques around how you do that. As long as you're doing it genuinely and authentically, you're not asking a question, then looking at your phone, you're remaining present to people. It is very, very powerful. That 5 minutes can make the next 55 infinitely more productive for those involved.
Yes, I've experienced that firsthand, and I can agree. We feel more relaxed and we are ready to take on the next challenge as well.
Exactly. And it could, in a busy world, right? And it doesn't have to be work. It could be your phone has rung. You've discovered that one of your kids is ill, that your pet's been taken to the vet. It doesn't matter, right? That's life. And so it's that little moment of breathe, take a pause. And again, this idea of, this is why I talk quite a lot about the neuroscience and the psychology and the physiology, because I think that's part of it. This is why the book isn't just about thinking strategically, albeit cognition is really important. It's the ability to think and to behave and to decide and to act and to lead strategically as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually rewatching The Last Dance documentary on Michael Jordan. And
Yeah.
Phil Jackson, their coach, they had compulsory meditations and practice in their routines. And I think they said that they have this routine that helps them stay at that peak state of mind as well. So I think it's to read this book once or twice in a year to have these routines set so we can be in that state of mind, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you also use this analogy in the book where you refer some leaders as rocks and some leaders as sponge. So what's the advice on like how can a rock like leader become more sponge like? And explain as well what is this concept? Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, in many ways, it may be familiar. It relates to the idea in some ways of what Carol Dweck then talked about, growth and fixed mindset. I actually heard it from Sir Clive Woodward, who was the England Rugby World Cup winning coach at the time. He then became a performance coach. He worked the Olympic team, for example. I think you start by recognizing the behavior. The rock versus sponge idea is that, back to certainty, a rock mindset will protect certainty. Yeah, it's that kind of, you notice it in rooms. If you're facilitating, you'll see that sort of reticence to accept a new perspective, actually, back to that point, to hear a different idea, to maybe explore other options, to see that it's even worthwhile spending any time considering other options. Sponges are more in the growth mindset side, so much more about absorbing new ideas. I think feedback is probably the classic one, dare I say it, a subject that I spend a lot of my time on. Even very senior leadership teams, I was with one just last week. How much do they really share, give, receive feedback? Not as they concluded, nowhere near enough, right? Forget anyone else as well. This is just a leadership team. This is just between them. And again, this is the link back to performance, right? In very high performing environments, you don't even really hear the word feedback. It's such a normal thing. The word has gone. Um, so I think it's a micro habit thing. I think it's a sort of, if that resonates with the listener, thinking, yeah, I'm probably a little bit, I can be like that, or those in my team, you're trying to invite ways to open people up a bit, so sort of, let's invite other options. Let's maybe run certain different types of conversation, different types of exercises to like make the most of it and to kind of challenge us and to give us different views and opinions. Because ultimately, being sponge-like is far from being a weakness, right? It's advantageous. The linking it back to the original story in the book, and actually a bit of background to that, knowing that this is going back 20 odd years, but the context of the Clive Woodward comment was that he chose a squad of 30, I think. And at the time, he famously left out a couple of pretty famous individuals. And the story goes that as time went on, he made choices not based on the 30 who were, the highest performing, the most successful. He was choosing 30 who he felt were coachable. He was choosing 30 who were going to be open-minded, versatile, agile, able to adapt, able to listen. And as a coach myself of 10 plus years, you definitely see that in people you meet. One of the early signs you tend to find with someone is you're sort of getting a little bit of a read on someone of, are they coachable? Are they in a position of they are open to this? Or maybe for whatever reason, the timing isn't right. And so I think it relates to that.
And what are the early signs, for example, that you see someone is coachable or not?
Yeah, you know what? I'm pausing on the answer to that. I probably do it rather instinctively. Very early chemistry, comments, conversations, body language. You can sometimes tell. I have to be mindful myself of allowing it to run, because sometimes it's nervousness and it's why we hear and it's a little bit of defensiveness maybe. But I think you can sometimes tell. I think you can sometimes tell with people. The best example actually of that would be, or a related point would be, coaching someone a couple of years ago. I started coaching them. They've actually just retired, sadly for me, because it was a real privilege. And global exec, very senior, incredible experience and life stories, and was 60, mid 60s, and yet was completely open to the fact, they said themselves, oh, I've still got so much to learn, so much to gain. And I think it's almost, that's what you're looking for in someone versus someone who, actually, I mentioned Satya Nadella at Microsoft. He has various quotes about this sort of idea of the know-it-all versus the learn-it-all, right? You're nodding, right? And I think it's similar to that idea of we can always learn something, which again takes you, I guess, back to feedback, right? In a team where I suggest to a leadership team, hey, we should do a little bit of feedback. The fact that you can observe so quickly in a group, oh, no, thank you very much. It's like, okay, well, there is clearly something happening here, which can, of course, also be contextual as much as the individuals in mind.
Yeah, makes sense. And you also talk about this. So we are on topic on curiosity, right? So I have a follow-up question. For example, a leader is in a meeting, let's say, but they are hesitant to ask questions, whether they are fearful of looking dumb or annoying everyone else. And this question is for both situations, whether that's a junior person or that's a senior leader.
Well, I don't think it's advice, really. I think it'd be jumping to conclusions to advise. I think I'd be curious as to the why, right? If I've understood your question, it's more about, so how did you phrase it? Fear of looking silly, for example, looking stupid, right? This is a self-awareness, right? So level one of the 4 levels in the framework is self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness. Go back to your other question earlier about who are some of the best strategic leaders I've worked with. They are the most self-aware. You can tell in the way they talk, in the way they hold themselves. They really understand themselves. They understand their, at a sort of a more surface level, they understand a little bit more about their behaviors, they understand their strengths and their weaknesses. You dig a bit deeper, they understand their values, they have done some work probably to understand their beliefs. And if not, then some of the coaching work often is about understanding, helping someone to understand their beliefs. Because normally it does link back to fears. It's a fear of something. So to go back to why am I not asking something or saying something? It's normally for fear of something, right? It's for fear of judgment, it's perception of others. And I guess that's where my line of inquiry would go is that about the individual or is it more about the group?
Yeah, makes sense. It boils down to like self-awareness and the values, right? Makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And you also mentioned in your book is that some people struggle in leadership roles because they are unwilling to learn, sorry, are not willing to unlearn things, and they still keep on managing instead of leading. So, my question to you is how can leaders become better at unlearning old assumptions and become agile learners? And also explain us what do you mean by agile learners?
Well, I think to your second question, the agile learners is kind of covered by what we explored a moment ago, right? With rocks and sponges and previously to curiosity. So I put that in that camp. You've said it yourself. I think the ability to unlearn is a skill in its own right, which requires you to be self-aware enough to recognize that maybe 20 years into my career, maybe I'm struggling to get the next promotion. I don't know, maybe I went for a job interview internally, externally, and I've been told, hey, guess what? This is that phrase again. You're not strategic enough, right? Whatever it happens to be. And I think it's the ability to recognize that, in fact, I'd probably say this is back to beliefs. It's starting to recognize that quite possibly you have worked for 20 years in a certain role, in a certain way. You mentioned managers versus leaders. I think this would be an example of it. You've maybe managed a team of 2 that went to 20, that went to 200, maybe, who knows? You're managing a team of 2,000, your P&Ls are larger, your footprint is larger, your product sets are larger. And often what happens is, in my experience, no one's ever really helped you to shift from simply managing more and larger with higher pressures into actual leadership. And what tends to give is, unfortunately, that person tends to, if they haven't had some help before then, they tend to burn out. Yeah. And so, in that context that you provided, linking back to beliefs and self awareness would be working with people through a sort of transitionary period where they recognize what beliefs do they maybe hold 20 years into their career that actually have served them well up to that point. But in order for them to develop further, to grow further, they are going to need to respectfully let go of some of those beliefs, which are in themselves underlying assumptions, because they are no longer useful. They're no longer in service of what they are here to do. And you need to let go of them in order to let in the new. There's a very powerful idea. I was shown this by someone who coached me for a while, who made a big difference on my life, which is this idea of the beliefs we hold. Okay. And it changes as we get older and we mature, we change anyway, right? As we go through what's known as adult stages of development. And so a belief for a few years can be incredibly useful to us. Actually, that belief that, I don't know, commitment matters, or something like that. It's sort of, that's something we hold. We may not have done the work to see that. We kind of probably hold that in our narrative, the way we make decisions, the way we make our own judgments about people. But we go through life, we go through work, we work on, we go a few years further on. And suddenly that same belief that's been very useful to us just starts to become a bit of a hindrance. It becomes a bit of a ball and chain on our ankle. And it's that moment of recognition that actually that thing, perfectionism is quite a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe the high flyers. I see a lot of people who have this. They were the high flyers. Maybe they're mid-40s. They were straight A graders. They went to Ivy League universities. Life has been, since they were children, about achievement, right? And I'm jumping here, but you'll get the picture. You're with them many years later, and suddenly they have this wonderful moment of recognizing that maybe this belief around the value of achievement isn't really their belief at all. It's their parents' belief. And actually, it's not going to be helpful to them as a leader looking forward. And so it's that process of recognizing that, kindly letting it go. And by letting it go, you're then able to let in new beliefs and develop accordingly.
Makes sense. And again, boils down to self awareness, like you said.
That's,
And it's perfect transition because what I see is like some managers who still keep on being stuck on their old assumptions is probably they're hesitant to change, right? They, like you said, they are more into perfectionism. So my question to you is more on your level 3 now, is developing strategic capabilities. Why why are like strong strategists so comfortable with uncertainty? And what do they do differently some compared to everyone else? Why they are so comfortable with uncertainty, strong strategists?
yeah, it's a fascinating subject, how comfortable someone is with the uncertain. I think I would say, in short, because we explore this in quite a lot of detail in the book, as you know, um, a good strategist, a strong strategist, to use your term, differentiates uncertainty from risk. Yeah. So sort of recognizing that risk is knowing the downsides of something, right? As in, quite objectively, you're aware of it, which is different to something being uncertain. That as we look ahead, we may not know. We may not know how something turns out, but back to the definition of strategy versus planning, we don't have all the answers. We can't wait forever. We need to be brave enough to make a call, aware that we need to keep an eye on the assumptions around us. We need to surface those assumptions. We need to track those assumptions around the context within which we made a decision right now. And over the next few weeks, we will just keep our eyes open on how have those assumptions possibly changed, rather than, back to that word perfectionism, we're sort of in a world where we're seeking certainty. We're seeking, I think the word control actually probably is what I'd use here. Um, I think that's probably the most common thing. In fact, it probably links back to what you said before about managing versus leading. I don't know the science of this. This is based on just working with thousands of people. Is many. We have fun with this in workshops I run, of recognizing that people. I don't know. Let's just take a different context of work. You're organizing a social activity, and you ask a load of people, right? Who here in a social group always organizes? And you normally get, in a group of 20 odd, you'll get a load of people put their hand up and normally smiling. And you'll say, well, why do you do that? Why do you tend to be the organizer? And, you can probably guess, right? You normally get people immediately starting to smile and go, oh, it's because if I don't do it, either it won't happen, or if I don't do it, it won't be very good. And if you think about it, again, allowing for people's individual circumstances, that's the same idea, isn't it? It's sort of, you're controlling. It's this idea of needing to know everything, needing to have your hands on everything. It's why delegation is still such a rare skill. A lot of people are supposed to be in leadership roles, but unfortunately, you work with them at close quarters, or you work with them and their teams often, as I do. And even though they say they do this, they don't really. Yeah, they give off a slight impression of, oh yeah, no, we're trusting, I provide. And then again, it may sound harsh, but the observation at close quarters is you realize in the team, what actually happens is the team are slightly fearful of making their own ideas, or maybe the boss is one of those bosses who has a bit of a tendency to create an environment where, give me all your ideas. But then what happens is a day later, they jump in and they course correct, they do it themselves. And so what happens over time, of course, is those people don't develop and you get the same patterns playing out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So clearly explained. And I've actually two follow-up questions on that. So the number one is going back to the point on leaders being managers and not leading. So do you think like they they are stuck in the managing side because they are unwilling to evolve with time change, because companies are changing, everything is changing around us, but they are not willing to change, while strategists are keep evolving with learning new skills, developing themselves? Do you think that might be the reason why they get stuck there, even if like companies have corporate trainings and everything, why they are so not not willing to learn and improve?
Yeah, I think I would go back to keep it simple in the sort of more, because the terminology of a manager versus a leader, I'm very aware of this myself. I personally believe they're quite different skills, right? But actually, I'm aware there are some people who argue they're the same thing. I would put it more in the context of back to reactive and creative leadership, conscious and unconscious leadership. This idea of, for many people, they're in this kind of more reactive state, which means that they're managing more based on their emotions, which again comes back to fear. Whereas a more conscious leader, a more creative leader is more able to, again, self-awareness comes back to what the self-awareness practices are. We talk about managing emotions. They're more aware of where they are part of the system, where they're able to understand their emotions better. They're better able to involve other people, and therefore they see uncertainty as fuel for creativity and innovation and opportunity, not as, they're not making their decisions ultimately based on fear and beliefs. But of course, it's fear and beliefs that aren't necessarily known to them, if that makes sense, which is again where coaching comes in.
Right, makes sense. And then my second question was more about micromanagers. So, what would be your advice for them? How they can take the first step and become self-aware and start becoming leaders, take the first step towards leadership?
Well, yeah, and to be fair on them, there's probably three elements to that, right? So I won't go them one by one, but I think what can people do? I think, well, hopefully, even in a lot of what we've already spoken about, there might be things that resonate. I would focus on the self-awareness thing. I would focus on what you notice, whether it's the practice of journaling, noticing. I think the ability to articulate and understand your own feelings and emotions, I think, is fundamental. Like, really understand your values and your beliefs. So maybe take one of those two lenses. Both would be wonderful. How do you do that? Well, there's plenty of guidance in the book, but even just noticing that, let's just say today, let's say people are listening to this as they go about their day to day, take a moment to think about today a decision you've taken that you found easy or one you found difficult, a conversation you had with someone where you felt triggered. What did you notice? What do you notice about that? So things like journaling, however you do that, whether it's in the morning, I journal. I journal through a sort of values lens. So it's kind of about awareness of your own values and your beliefs and understanding how they play out. And simply by becoming more aware, you might have an accountability buddy. It might be someone you talk to. It could be your partner. It could be a flatmate. It could be a colleague at work where you're both kind of committed to develop yourself. I think is recognizing where you mentioned micromanaging. Let's say maybe let's say you recognize that you're listening to this now, laughing or smiling to yourself, thinking, "Oh, yeah, I don't do that as much as I could." Or maybe it's about how much do you really trust other people? Are you maybe that person that has a bit of a tendency to give the impression that you're trusting others, but a day later you steam in, you're a little bit overly controlling. If you kind of recognize that, well, firstly, invite the feedback, right? It's to kind of invite the feedback. But having the discipline and the practices to pause in time, whenever that happens to be, and notice what that's about, starting to understand what meaning you were giving to a situation. I think that is the gateway. That is the beginning of where that work starts.
I love that. Super clear, Charlie. And I'm just going a bit off topic, but I would love to know, like, how do you journal? Like, how do you find like your values, etc.? What's your procedure of journaling, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, there are two different things in there. And again, do actually in the book itself, in the book, there's QR codes and they take you to my site. And on the site, there's dozens of resources, right? So actually, there's a whole set of exercises on all this if people wanted to go and do this. Let me answer your question. So, the values piece, hey, look, these are publicly available. Go to someone like Brené Brown's website. You go to, I think, on my own website, I think you can download a list of them. You could do it top of head. It's just the list is easy, right? It just makes it easier for you. So let's say you get a load of values out. You sort of look at the sheet, look at the list. What I would invite you to do, you don't have to have prompt, but you could do this top of head. You could do this listing now. You think, okay, don't overthink it too much. It's like right now, as you sit here right now, or later today when you got a pen and paper for you, and I invite, do pen and paper, right? Pen and paper is really useful, really important actually, this process. Take a moment to think, right, what right now is really important to me? How would I describe that? Relationships, trust, family, empowerment, creativity, respect, recognition, whatever, right? And you've got hundreds of them. Make up your own words if you want to. And really then the process, I won't go into kind of every step, but it's kind of then inviting you to kind of think, okay, and of those, of that kind of long list, what's my short list? And why? Why are they? What do they mean to me? And then some of the questions around that are questions around, they're kind of inviting you to consider that from different perspectives. How did they inform a decision you took today? How have they helped to guide you? That's the sort of spirit of them. And then it's a practice in its own right. Again, hence the subtitle, right? It's kind of actually, you start getting good at that. You start to be able to elicit your beliefs associated to those values, right? Again, that same idea of a belief that might be both helpful, but also another belief that may be a hindrance. What's serving you right now? Again, the practice is you start to journal through that kind of lens and those sort of questions. Once a day, twice a day, you have it. Actually, get back to meetings and check-ins. I know very senior leaders who will invite their team to talk about what value is resonating with them today, or what is the value they want to live most fully in this meeting today. And that's, that might sound a little bit woo, right? But actually that's pretty powerful, especially for those who are making big calls, high pressure calls, because back to my opening point, right? We are still all human. And people have good days and bad days, right? And our values and what matters to us fluctuates day to day. So it's about that consistency and that awareness. And that's the idea if we want to embed it in our practices.
Really super, super clear. I'm going to try it as well for sure, because I don't journal, but I need to inculcate this habit for sure. So coming back to the topic of managing uncertainty. So you mentioned this in your book, you refer to as something called sense making. So how can leaders avoid getting stuck in perfectionism and instead take meaningful action during uncertain times?
Yeah, and again, there's probably a few different ideas in there, so I'll keep my answer short. Sense making really is just about spotting patterns, right? That's really what that's about. Again, being aware of where your own blind spots, your blinkers, your filters are, inviting more voices, sitting with things over time, sleeping on things, being more comfortable. This is one of the whole chapters on creativity. I think it's a bit of a kind of dark art, but actually there's a lot we can do to be more creative. We can all be more creative, right? We all have. It's about unlocking creative potential in us. So that's something that we haven't touched on, but it's really important. So I think the perfectionism thing, again, perfectionism is a type of decision-making style. And perfectionism, look, I'll give you the headline. If anyone's listening to this who recognizes, I have a tendency to be a perfectionist. Perfection doesn't exist, right? It's impossible. So just remember that. So if you're there, now that's a little bit different to, I would say, another decision-making style or type, especially when the chips are high, right? When the stakes are high, which is an analyzer, someone who needs to make a decision, but they are procrastinating, delaying because they need to seek more information. But what happens if you seek more information? It's going to take more time and cost and resource. And meanwhile, the opportunity is possibly fading. The circumstances moved on. Your competition have made a call. And then what happens? You wait a couple of weeks. Is your decision ultimately any better for it? Or would you be better to make a decision based on what you know, do a few experiments, take some action so that we can learn, and you can see how the framework starts to work, right? Because this all starts to very much interrelate.
Makes sense. And you also share a story, I can't remember correctly now, about a map that a soldiers were lost somewhere and they found a map. What was that story, if you remember?
I'm not going to attempt to. It's more of a parable, that story. Yeah, I think your readers are better to kind of read it verbatim than me attempt to make a hash of it by memory. It's in the nature of what I do read a lot. A lot of those sort of stories are the sort of thing where I've been running a workshop in one corner of the world or another, and someone has just maybe I've said something or shared something and someone has just offered these stories.
Yeah.
So in the book, they tend to be the sort of ones that just absolutely stuck with me. So no, thank you for remembering
Yes.
that. That was
So we
something.
leave our
I'll
listeners
leave
on
it
a
to you, Hannah.
cliffhanger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
gotta read the book. So I've got last two questions, right? So what is the single biggest takeaway you hope our reader walks away with your book, Be More Strategic?
That is learnable. That is learnable, I think, in short. It's accessible to anyone. It's not, as I said earlier, it's not about, it's not academic. It shouldn't be. It's not for the elites. It's not for the top. Learn it early. Later this week, I'm really pleased. I'm running something for a large company, and it's their graduate group. It's a like top talent group, and their organization is committed to learn more about this in the early stage of their career. And I wish more people would do that.
Powerful.
Very, yeah, and it's wonderful, and they are sponges, right? That's almost what makes it more fun to do because they're a lot more sponge-like. They don't have that sense of all the stuff we talked about before. They don't have 20, 30 years of experience, so therefore they're a lot more open, actually, naturally. And number two would be it is useful in life. You know, it's a little bit cliche depending on where you live in the world. So I'm from the UK, but I've lived and traveled, you know, to many countries. Been lucky enough to do that, and if someone says to you in life they have a 5-year plan, in some areas of the world, they can be rather ridiculed or mocked. But most of the highest performing people I know, the ones who are most fulfilled, the most satisfied, however you want to measure success in inverted commas, they tend to be the ones who think like this. They tend to look ahead. They consider their options. They have mapped some of their choices out. They tend to use this in life. Or if not, then as a coach, within 10 minutes of coaching many people, you're no longer really talking about work at all. One of the most common things you get from someone coaching is they say to you, Charlie, would it be useful if I told you a little bit about my life, about my relationships, about my childhood? Which normally suggests, yeah, there is a reason why they're offering that information.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Charlie. It's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. But one final question actually comes to mind.
That's okay.
You have met CEOs, you have met so many top people, let's say top leaders. So my question is, what interpersonal skill stands out in the most successful people you have met?
Listening.
That's amazing because so many podcast guests have asked this. Some of them have said listening as well. Yeah, please
Yeah,
elaborate as well.
I will. Well, actually, I think for those, before we started, you commented on the thing behind me, right? Which says,
Yeah,
you can read
the
it out.
secret to great communication.
And the secret to great communication in that workshop I ran was listening. It really is. Let me elaborate. You said elaborate. It's being present to people. It's being present yourself and then being present to others. And there's an awful lot more you can learn to do. It is something you can continue to get better and better and better at. And in the book, we talk a little bit about that. I go into a few of the things that I've picked up from some wonderful people around the world, including the likes of Otto Scharmer at MIT. But this ability to be present, to listen, be curious. Thinking back to some other points earlier about maybe, let's say, back to your idea of a meeting. You asked about advice in a strategic meeting tomorrow for someone. Really listen, really seek to understand other people's points of view. You might disagree with them. You might find their views disgusting or abhorrent, but are you really listening and are you really seeking to understand their view? And then are you making some sort of decision or conclusion accordingly? So yeah, I think listening is a great superpower. And back to your question about examples and exemplars, I think the two kind of relate. I said earlier about walk the talk. I think this is the thing you tend to really notice in some of the best strategic leaders I've worked with, public sector, private sector, different walks of life. There is something about them. You remember that feeling of meeting them because they are so present to you. And I think it's a gift in some people, but I think for a lot of people I've worked with at close quarters, it is something they have worked hard and they've learned to do.
Yeah, it makes sense because I had another guest who said I asked the same question and she said it's make other person feel important. And how can we make other person feel important is through listening, right? If you're 100% attention.
100%. You've said the word for me, right? 100% attention to that person. And that's it. Yeah. Just think about just this conversation right now. Yeah. We're having sort of a little bit of time and check, technicalities and, questions, but actually it's about being present to the other person, right? What they're thinking, what they're curious about. And it is, unfortunately, it's rarer, I think, than it was, not helped
Yeah,
by too much time on screens in person. I'll tell you this, right? I do an awful lot of like offsites and those sort of things. As you know, I think it's how we met, right? And post COVID, I still hear, this is a few years on now, I still hear, aside from what the objective was, the aims, the reason we met, whatever happens to be, you still hear people say at the end of those sessions, CEOs down, I tell you what, forget everything else. It was just brilliant to be together in person with my fellow humans, right? That's just, you hear that time and time and time again. Why? Because of relationships, because of communication, because of trust. Because if we start to trust a little bit more, we have those connections with people, we can be more effective, more collaborative, we get more great stuff done.
definitely. And you know what? People make excuses that, oh, if I'm on a Teams calls, I get a lot of notification. But let me ask you, Charlie, what did you do the first thing when we started the recording? Was that, okay, let me just turn off my notifications so I'm 100% with you. And I was like, oh, wow.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I think there's no excuse not to be present with your person. So yeah, amazing. I think I can talk to you for hours, Charlie, but
We'll do
I
part
think
two.
we need. So thank you once again. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for our listeners as well. And I'll link Charlie's all social media handles in the show notes. I'll link the Amazon link of the book as well in the show notes so you can buy. Anything else, Charlie, you would like to add?
No, just a big thank you, really. Thank you, Sudan, for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you once again to our listeners as well. Thank you.